Thank you very much, Dennis. Thank you very much, the organizers. And it's a great honor for me to be included in this panel of very interesting people. First of all, I would like to, for those of you that don't know, differentiate between Yagé and Ayahuasca. Perhaps all of us know about Ayahuasca, but there is an area in the Amazon in which there is another admixture plant used, not Psychoactive viridis, and this is Yagé, which is Banisteriopsis capi and Diplopterus cabrerana. They are from the same family, Malpighiaceae. This is probably older than the use probably older, although we don't know for sure, than Ayahuasca. Certainly, the use of Banisteriopsis capi alone probably is the oldest, and I think that Dr. Manuel Torres is going to talk us about that. But here we are going to I'm going to talk mostly about Ayahuasca, which is Banisteriopsis plus Psychoactive viridis. Of course, you know that both Diplopterus cabrerana and Psychoactive viridis contain the dimethyltryptamine. Okay, we probably all know, and I think Manolo is going to give us a quote of Villavicencio, Manuel Villavicencio, who was the first one to report a trip with ayahuasca. And of course, Spruce, about the same year, I think it was 1852, at the same time Spruce was then identifying the vine and also had the courage to take the medicine, but they gave him too many things at the same time, and he just got sick and took a coffee on top and went to his hammock. But anyway, he was brave enough to be the first one. And ayahuasca and Yagé are being used by many different indigenous tribes of the upper Amazon. When I did my doctoral dissertation, I have 72, and in brackets you have the linguistic families. So the upper Amazon is this area, this huge triangle, the Andes and the Rio Madeira and Rio Negro. The first really pioneer in the study of Natem, in this case, I'm not sure whether the Shuar at that time used Diplopterus or Psychotria, but for sure they were using Calliandra pentanda, probably, called Sumi. And anyway, the brew was called Natem. And Rafael Carsten wrote a very detailed description of the ceremonies, and they were collective ceremonies. They were not the more, traditional one in the Peruvian Amazon, very few people in the dark. No, this was big celebrations in which men and women were present. Carsten was the one who also reported the whole process of head shrinking among the Shuar. Another pioneer, and I was very, very sorry to find out too late that he just died, 2002. I could have met him, I could have been trying to meet him, but I never thought that he was even alive, is Irving Goldman, who worked in Colombia in the 1939 to 1940. Among the Cubeo. He has also very detailed descriptions of the ceremonies among the Cubeo. It's a whole ethnography. Of course, we have to pay tribute to Schultes. Without him, we will not be here, and since Mark Plotkin is going to talk about him, I just leave it for him. But another great pioneer was Gerardo Reichel-Dolmatov, the Austrian-Colombian scholar who is practically the father of Colombian anthropology and archaeology. And he was documenting the use of capi, probably with Diplopterus, then Yagé, among different indigenous tribes of the Tucano family. Reichel-Dolmatov wrote this very crucial work, Amazonian Cosmos, in which for the first time we become aware of the importance of capi among indigenous Amazonian tribe. Without, this book really opened a whole chapter And then he also wrote The Shaman and the Jaguar, which he points out the link between shaman and jaguar transformation. There are also other animals, but anyway, he put an emphasis. And this shamanic transformation into jaguar, you find it all over Central America and South America. It's one of the most common motifs in the Amerindian shamanism. Raisa Dolmatov was also, he also tried and recorded his journey and transcribed, it's published in this book. He realized the importance of the iconography of the Tucano, all related to the visionary world. So he found out that all the narratives, all the mythology, all the iconography, practically it's impossible to understand this indigenous group without reference to Capi and the visionary world. And something similar did Jean Landon in Montesiona in Colombia. She also found that all the narratives, everything, all the facial painting, all decorations, everything is related also to the visionary experiences. We have to name, of course, Michael Harner, who did his ethnography among the Shuar, much later, much after Karsten. And in, I think it was 1973, he published Hallucinogens and Shamanism, which is practically an anthology. There are also a reference to other plants, but it's practically an anthology about Yahe and ayahuasca. Later, as you know, well, he had two experiences, and he decided to create a whole school of shamanism in the US without the use of any plants. Although he was always, he is still alive, sympathetic to the plants, but he thought that it was a better way in America to do it legally, you know, so introduce people to shamanism. Thinking about the globalization of ayahuasca, that this is happening right now. 50 years ago, ayahuasca was not in the horizon. I mean, not in the Ethnopharmacological Search of Psychoactive Drugs. There was only one article by Claudio Naranjo about harmaline, but nothing else. But anyway, so if we think about the spread of ayahuasca, I would like first to mention Pasto, you know, in Colombia. Pasto had related, I mean, there were a lot of, well, here in the Sibundoy Valley, we have two indigenous tribes, the Kamsa and the, shall I put it somewhere? Okay. The Kamsa and the Ingano. And the Kamsa stayed mostly in the Sibundoy Valley, but the Ingano used to travel a lot, went to Pasto. They had contact, they didn't have, it's too high, they didn't have, they could not grow the ayahuasca, but they have contact with the lowland indigenous groups. So here is the Sibundoy Valley. This is a photo I took many years later. And they had contact with lowland Indians from Mocoa. They bought the Yahe from them. The Sibundoy, the Kamsa, and the Ngano were the great specialists of Brugmansia. I mean, if you go to the Sibundoy Valley, you know, it's probably the richest in the world in terms of species of Brugmansia. And when I went in 1984 to the Sibundoy Valley, I met this young man who was being trained by one of the Kamsa Indians, and I just wonder. I mean, this was a mestizo, you know, a farmer who went to be trained to become a shaman, or to become a curandero. Let's drop the word shaman. And I just wonder how old this tradition was. In 1984, I met him, but I don't know if we go back. 1971 is when I first got in touch with Yahe. Here again, Pasto, we have Mocoa, and then Florencia. I was born in Florencia, in the eastern slope of the Andes, and I met I have met him all my life, really, since I was a child, this man, Apolinar Yacanamijoy, but it was only through meeting Terence that I learned about Yahé, and then through this man, Hans Mosler Herbert, a German guy who had a restaurant in Florencia. Terence and I used to go, and Erika, his girlfriend, at the time, used to go to Hans because it was the best food in Florencia. And Hans, he was in touch with Apolinar. He had a very interesting story, and he arrived to the Caquetá, I don't know how many years when I met, but he was young at the time. And he had been with the Tucano Indians. He told me about Brugmansia. He told me how to prepare Brugmansia, taking several flowers, put it in the forehead, in the back of the head, go to sleep, relax. And he said that it produced lucid dreams. And indeed, some weeks after I was in Florencia, I went back, I was living in Norway, I started to have these lucid dreams. And I was very worried, because I didn't know much about this. And I went to the doctor, you are just dreaming, until I found some literature about the astral body projection that makes sense, and so. But anyway, so there is something to investigate, if there is any connection there between the atropine alkaloids and Brugmansia and this kind of lucid dreams. And this is in 1971. Okay, and this is Hans now. I, just by chance, about 3 weeks ago, I met a Colombian woman who knew his daughter, who gave me his phone number, and I talked to him, and so I am planning to interview him for the publication, because he probably has a very interesting story. And there was another person who I don't have a photo, was a Hungarian called Carlos. Hans said that his name was Kalman. I thought that it was the last name, but Kalman in Hungarian is both first name and last name. So we are trying to trace him. Although several people said that he is probably dead. He was a football star. He was playing with the Hungarian national team and went to Venezuela, fell in love with a woman, lost all his money. Then he was stranded there, somehow went to the Caquetá, the region where I was born, and they became friends with Hans. This is perhaps interesting, because already in 1971, I was introduced to Yahé through this, German, Hungarian, and American, So Ede Fresca, who is also Hungarian, he was is thinking of to organize a conference next year in Prague, in Budapest, and he's thinking to try to invite all these people. He says that perhaps the globalization of ayahuasca started, in the 90s, but here is like inoculation in a way. It happened in 1971. Anyway, 1979, 8 years later, I went back to Yurayaco, had my second Ayahuasca experience. In the meantime, I was doing my homework, reading as much as I could about different ethnographies and plants, sacred plants. But anyway, so I went again and took Yahé for the second time. When I took Yahé, there were also all the peasants present in the ceremony. The thing is that for me it was so strong that I hardly remember anything what happened out there. I became a serpent, I vomited, I saw, it was just so extraordinary experience. But I remember that there were some people around me, some mestizo who arrived after I had drunk the brew. So there was already contact with in Colombia with mestizo, both in the Sibundoy Valley and in the Caquetá region. By the way, many years later, this is Natividad, the woman here, the second to the left. Natividad was because Roberto died. Roberto's wife, Roberto was the son of Apolinar, and she is now a very important yajecera, who together with other yajeceros had an encounter, Encuentro de Taitas, in that area in Yurayaco, and they published this very stern complaint about doctors and other people using their sacrament. So this is, but these are several families. They are very much opposed to Western people taking the ceremony, the sacred sacrament. But on the other hand, in other indigenous tribes, they are very open to it. But just to have this into account. Okay, now we go to the second area, which is most known today, the area of Tarapoto, Pucallpa, Iquitos. Very important to have into account that a lot of the vegetalismo has strongly Andean influence. You see it in the mythology, you see it in some of the songs, and some of the words being used, Sachamama, Yurayaco, Chuyachaki, many of the words used in the same Icaro, although I'm not sure. I thought that it will be from Icarai, which means to blow, give energy, but I'm not sure about that. By the way, Icaro, many people say Icaro, but it's Icaro, it's from Icarai, okay? And Pucallpa. Okay, so there is a very strong Andean influence into the Amazon. So in fact, all this area, is the eastern slope of the Andes, is to a great extent a cultural area. Much later we are talking about the third area of diffusion of ayahuasca, which is the churches in Brazil. Anyway, so there was already psychologists and psychiatrists, Peruvian psychiatrists, interested in the phenomenon of vegetalismo, of ayahuasca use, especially in Pucallpa. But it was Marlene Dovkin de Rios, the first one who wrote a monograph about this, although her work was restricted to Belén, which is one of the areas in Iquitos. And so she didn't do much work among the indigenous groups. So it was restricted. She wrote many articles about ayahuasca, and then lately she wrote these books. Now the thing is, what I was very astonished to learn, 1 year before she died, she had an interview, and she said, "I took ayahuasca only once," which is, the psychedelic journey of Marlene Dovkin de Rios, so only once, so. Okay, of course, at that time, the only literature known was the Yajé letters. Bruce Lamb, Wizard of the Upper Amazon, I think it was also 1973. This is a photograph by Kat Harrison. About Manuel Córdoba Ríos. Later came another book about him. This is very embellished story, but it hit the popular culture. I think that a lot of people started to know about ayahuasca through this book, Wizard of the Upper Amazon, and later this other one. I don't know how many books he sold, but anyway. So, and I was then I went into Iquitos after being in Yurayaco for the second time, I thought that I will make a film about Don Apolinar, but unfortunately he died a few months later. Then it was Stern who told me, go to Iquitos. There are some very interesting curanderos there. There I met Don Emilio, and I made this film, Don Emilio and his little doctors. Now I collected so much information by making this film that I realized that I had a doctoral dissertation in hands. So I went every summer that I had free. I was then living in Helsinki. Went every summer and documented the practices, the ideas of health and illness, collected plants, and so on. And perhaps the most important idea that I got out of this meeting with Don Emilio and other ayahuasqueros is the idea of plant teacher. He said that ayahuasca is just one plant, one of the doctores, but there are many other doctores. And I realized that many of them were admixture plants to ayahuasca, they put it in the ayahuasca, but others, they were used by themselves. The other very interesting thing is that they use the ayahuasca brew in order to study the properties of other plants. So they will put something in the brew, and by seeing the visions, you know, in the idea, they think that the spirit of the plant will communicate with them, and they will tell them what it is for. Bristol in the Sibundoy Valley, he had found something similar, and he realized that putting different plants into the yahe brew was a way to increase the pharmacology, just doing the same thing, just putting a plant, you know, getting the visions or seeing the changes in the effects, and so they will realize that this is for this, for that. So there are many ayahuascas, really. So I think that when I did my field work, I collected something like about 70 plants, but later on other people have been adding in. Probably now we have something like 200 plants. And as Dennis said, so very little study, even though we published, of course, the first paper we published in the America Indigena in Mexico in Spanish didn't have much impact. The second one was in a book by Schultes, had no impact. And even, you know, so many years later, we still, you know, we don't know about many of these plants. So there is much work to be done, and I hope young people will take this task. So I published in '84 the concept of plant as teachers that came then in German next year, '85, in Spanish, and then in French in '86. So of course the idea that the plants have spirit is common in the Amazon, not only plants but also animals. In this area, all, for instance, the big trees, the big lupuna trees, the ceiba, they are supposed to have also spirit, and you are able to communicate with them through the means of ayahuasca, and they are very respectful. For instance, they will never urinate or defecate near one of these big trees, because they believe then that the spirit of the tree will, you know, take revenge and hit you. The idea of plant teacher it came almost simultaneously in the book by Jean-Pierre Chomel, Voir, Savoir, Pouvoir, and he writes the plants in the Jaguar cosmology, l'unique chemin de la connaissance, you know, the only path of knowledge. I found the same idea in the Sibundoy Valley in '84, I think, when I was working with Miguel Chindoy, who was the son of Salvador Chindoy, who worked with Schultes, and I was then making a map of the plants and collecting plants. And this mestizo that I mentioned earlier, now this blue poncho, he is the one who told me this is the garden of science, el jardín de la ciencia. So the same idea of plant teachers found in the Sibundoy Valley. In fact, when I took Yahe with Apolinar, remember after vomiting and going into his house, and I was marveled, and then I told him, Don Apolinar, you know so much. And he said, it's not me, it's Yahe. You know, and Don Emilio, the same thing, you know, it is not me, it's ayahuasca, who is the real teacher. Of course, many of these mestizos are partially indigenous or culturally indigenous. Once I was with Jose Corral, and he was preparing ayahuasca, and ayahuasca was bubbling, and then he said, look, these are people. And of course, later on, I understood that we have to understand this as very prevalent in Amerindian thought. This is from Eduardo Viveiro de Castro. Amerindian shamanism appears to be guided by the the idea is that in Western science, we try to be as objective as possible. So you put the subject completely separated, you study whatever is there, and try not influence at all to take out all the subjective. In the Amerindian thought, it's quite the opposite. Amerindian shamanism appears to be guided by the inverse principle. To know is to personify, to take the point of view of that which is to be known, or rather of who. For shamanic knowledge envisages something which is someone, another subject or agent. The other takes the form of a person. I think that perhaps Glenn Shepard is going to touch these ideas later on. But anyway, I've been thinking so that the way of the epistemology of many of these Amerindian is that instead of you see what it is out there and you try to analyze it from all parts and take it apart and so on, you try to become what you are interested in. It's a way of knowledge of identification or even transformation into the object of what you are studying, personifying so that you become one and that you understand it not only from the outside but also from the inside. And Eduardo Viveiro Castro has also some other very interesting ideas. In mythical times, animals, plants, and humans were all persons able to transform. They were all shamans. So in a way, taking ayahuasca or yahe or these other sacred plants is to travel back into the primordial time. You go back into the beginning where everything was conscious. Everything all were people, persons. And the original condition common to humans and animals is not animality, but rather humanity. So it's like everything is human. Everything, and when they talk about, for instance, the house of the spirit, they say, oh no, they have their houses, but they are like ours, only much better than ours, but they are like ours. So they have this idea of cities as well, or towns, and many indigenous tribes have this idea. And then the shamans are able to see the non-human beings as they see themselves, because they see themselves as human. The jaguar sees himself as a human, and we are the jaguar for the jaguar. So, thus playing the role of active interlocutors in trans-Pacific dialogues. And Philippe Descola has this other idea, reflecting of the difference between nature and culture. He said that a cosmology where the majority of plants and animals are included in a community of persons sharing most of the faculties, behaviors, and moral codes ordinarily granted to humans hardly meets the criteria of such an opposition. If everything is alive, there are all persons out there, so how can we differentiate between culture and nature? So it's all the same. Okay, so I worked several summers with the mestizo, collecting plants. I mean, here they are using nettles for healing. Very often I left the microphone open and I went for a walk to be able to get conversations, with permission, conversations among them about, patients and spirits and stories, And I did several periods of diet. To follow the whole procedure. At that time in Iquitos, the ayahuasca ceremonies, you find it only in the periphery of the city. You have to ask a lot to get access to some ayahuasqueros. There were, I don't know how many, but it was not so that easy. And so one, Don Emilio introduced me to Jose Corral, who introduced me to other people, and so on. And so this is the kind of ceremonies. Very often the young people went there just to see the movie. There was no healing involved, just to see the movie. So, I was curious about the whole process of diet. But I will go back. So I was asking some of these young people, what about doing the diet? Finally, I convinced two of them, Don Emilio's son and this young man here, in black, to do the diet. And I thought I'm going to make a film about the whole process of keeping the diet. And so went to Don Jose Corral's place and started the diet. And I said, I'm going to do the diet with you. So we all do the diet. But after some days, they could not take it anymore. One of them put salt. Salt is the big thing, And, said, oh, okay. And the other one, 14 days, So in the end, I was the only one who did the diet, and I could not make a film about myself doing the diet, But then later on, when I spent some time with the Shipibo curandero. I did the diet. I was very interested. I did it several times. I was interested to know what happens, when you do the diet. Okay, I learned a few things. It was never long enough, 1 month. So it's really not enough to learn so much. But one thing I learned, especially when I was with Don Jose Corral, I was having often lucid dreams. And I told Don Jose, very often I have this dream. He said, now you're learning. So I think that there is some kind of involvement. When you're doing the diet, during the daytime, everything is kind of dreamy, in the beginning you are hungry, but then you completely forget about that. You are in a dream state, and somehow the things seems to be, plants, they seem to be talking to you in a way, in a different way, so you see nature in another way. So, and then at night, very often, out-of-body experiences, going out there in the forest and so on. So perhaps part of it is involved in the real initiation. I don't say that I had real initiation because 1 month is too little. I did it several times. But anyway, at the end of all these several periods of field work, then I wrote my doctoral dissertation. It was in comparative religion, not in anthropology. All this very anthropological, more anthropological than comparative. And then in the Czech Republic, they made a very beautiful edition of it. Never come in Spanish. In 2000, I don't remember what year was, Dennis, that we were invited to the first conference by Alan Shoemaker.
1986.
86. No, but much later. No, in the year 2000 something. 2005. Okay.
Yes.
That one, yeah. So, the book was published, Vegetalismo. They printed something like 950 copies only. And, but somebody in Canada read my thesis, went to Iquitos, met Don Jose Corral, and then created an ethnobotanical garden around his house. So I was astonished, that Jardín Ethnobotanico Guayramama. And I think that to a great extent, it started, I think Barbara Friedman, she wrote a very nice essay in Ayahuasca, Shamanism and Beyond. She wrote a very interesting essay how many of these ayahuasqueros have their garden, around. And I think it has been a lot because of the Western, they say, let's have the garden, Of course, many of them, they have their plants, but to do the idea of a garden and with many plants and labels and all that, it came from Westerns. And this is, Dennis wrote, made this photo of Don Jose Corral when he was 100, 99, so he died 102, so. I regret very much, when I was doing my work in the Peruvian Amazon, I regret so much that I didn't go to the Brazilian side, because it was kind of difficult to go from Pucallpa to Cruzeiro. There was an airplane, from time to time, but, finally when I went there in 1984, it was on the plane of a Peruvian minister who was going to Rio Branco, and then I took my film to Rio Branco, and it was shown there. it was advertised like the origin of ayahuasca, origin of Santo Daime. And Clodomir Monteiro, a friend who did the first studies of the Brazilian phenomenon, he said that that occasion was the first time, the very first time, that all the three churches, the UDV, the Santo Daime, the Barquinha, were together in one room to see the film. But anyway, years later, I went to Boca do Acre. I met this man, Señor Domingo, who prepared ayahuasca, and then he was singing songs very similar to those of the UDV. And he was invoking Cayano, but he didn't know anything about Mestre Gabriel. So, and then another lawyer told me that he had heard about Señor Flores, who also knew about Cayano, and he has many stories and so on. And, you know, this Brazilian vegetalista tradition never investigated, and I think it's now too late, you know, because, you know, so what a pity, you know, it's just like this is stupid of me, you know, that of course, you know, there is a border, you know, but the language changes, but the whole tradition is there, and not only in Brazil, but also in Bolivia and so on, so, yeah. At that time, you know, here a little connection with the Heraclitus, where is Tango, Deborah, okay, you're there. So Dimitri Efthybulos from Cyprus, he was very important to all the anthropologists working in Iquitos at the time because he had this motorcycle, you know. We were always broke, you know, very little money. And so he took us to places, and he became very interested as well in all this. You know, here we are preparing a cigarette of Banisteriopsis capi and then taking the mushrooms. And he once when I arrived to Iquitos, went to see him, he showed me this photograph. He said, look at this, and now look at that. And then, you know, so by changing 90 degrees, suddenly you see the spirits. And I helped him to, well, I organized his first exhibition of photographs in Bogota. Then we did another exhibition in Pasto, and the third one in Leticia. And it was very interesting because we todos went to see the exhibition, and they were very interested. So, oh, the white people are doing something interesting. So he published a book, I don't remember what year, Spirits of the Rainforest. I was very sorry to hear that he died about a year or 2 years ago. Another very important event that took place in 1985, I organized the first symposium on ayahuasca within the context of the Americanist Conference. The Americanist Conference takes place every 2 years in Europe, in the Americas. In 1985, it was in Bogota. Pity that I don't have a group photo. You know, at the time I recorded the whole thing, but I didn't take photos. But anyway, it was important because suddenly, for the first time, Jean Lando was there, Schulte sent the paper, Branwan Gates, who the great botanist, he sent us a paper, he could not be there. Plutarco Naranjo, Ecuadorian, who wrote a book about ayahuasca, was there as well. And I invited Guillermo Arevalo. I managed to get money for him to get from Pucallpa to Bogota to the conference, and he wrote a paper, and he did it the shamanic way, you know, because I explained, conference, you have to present something, you know, it's going to take about 20 minutes, half an hour, it's about 12 pages. You know, he was keeping the diet, and he wrote a very good paper. He presented Angelica Gebhardt, later, a Shipibo specialist, she was very impressed and said that this is very accurate, very important paper. Anyway, so out of end, I met in this conference Donna and Manolo. And there was the seed, this encounter was the seed of many other things that happened later. With Dennis, we collected plants, and this is, I don't remember what year it was, that we were collecting. I took these plants to Hawaii. And thanks to Schultes, he called me, Helsinki, said, Luis Eduardo, I'm sending you a magic carpet. I didn't know what he was talking about. And it was this Harvard University officer, And thanks to this Harvard card, I was able to take to Hawaii many plants, you know. I've seen that many of the psychotrias, you know, that now they prepare ayahuasca in Hawaii. Many of these psychotrias, I took it. And I also took their Diplopterus cabrera. I took it from a curandero living near Iquitos. His wife had taken it from Ecuador. And I took it to Hawaii, and from there I know that it's now everywhere. In that year, in 1985, the same year of the conference, Dennis introduced me to Pablo Amaringo. And he showed some paintings, aquarelles really, on cheap paper, but very accurate, you know? And so I asked Pablo, do you remember the visions you had? Because he said that he had been a shaman, well, a vegetalista, you know. He knew all these plants, you know, he knew the mythology very well. So I was very impressed. So when he said that, I remarked, you know, you have a very good memory. You remember very well. Yeah, he said, I remember everything I have seen. He has this fantastic eidetic memory. So he gave Dennis and me, each of us, you claim 4 paintings, I don't know. I have only 1.
3 or 4.
All right, okay. But anyway, this is the one that I got, and I took it to Finland. And what I was is, okay, I have been working with the vegetalista tradition for several years, but this was completely unfamiliar. Many of these elements completely unfamiliar. What is this? You know, so I was, you know, this looks like Chinese, they like a throne, you know, kind of Inca, but also perhaps, you know, it's a mixture of elements, a city, and then you have a flying saucer there. And so I took a photocopy of it, and I sent it to Pablo, and then asking, what is this, what is this, what is this? And what it came, it was a long, and also there were some elements in Dennis's painting. I asked him, what is this? And then it came, the description with the names of the spirits and everything, you know, very detailed. And I said, wow, this is absolutely extraordinary, you know. And then I started a collaboration. Then I changed completely my career in a way. Instead of going to the vegetalistas, then I concentrated on Pablo. And got for him the best possible materials. I always went via Miami. Manolo and Donna helped me to buy absolutely the best possible artwork, and started a collaboration that lasted many years. The next slide is not the one should be here. But anyway, so then it came all this mythology. This is a large oil painting called Cosmologia Amazonica. So, of course, many of these elements I could recognize from working with the vegetalistas. They talk about the mermaids, the yacumama, some of these birds, you know, tunchi. I've heard it, but many of these completely different. So now the thing is, reflecting about this, is that Pablo had a whole cosmology, but I had never met any other person who will validate that cosmology, who will say, oh yes, these are these spirits. When the book was published, and I was having copies of the paintings, friends of ours took it to other places, you know, in Iquitos, in Pucallpa, everybody recognized, when they saw this painting, oh, this is ayahuasca, immediately. And friends took it to indigenous tribes, and well, they say, oh, there was big commotion, not of the details of the elements, but of the general feeling of the vision. So we collaborated years. I mean, I could talk about each of these paintings a long time, because he made very detailed descriptions of it. And my understanding of vegetalismo expanded, because some of these elements were, you know, this is, for instance, this is an attack, you know. The darker, you know, it's an attack. So he's having help from a spirit there who sends some sort of cable out there so that they can get out of this. I later had visions similar to this, you know. So now at least I can put, he called these tingunas, I can put a name to that kind of phenomenon. For him, for Pablo, it was a kind of electromagnetic phenomenon. So when an ayahuasquero finishes his work, he will send away the visions, just blow them, and let them go. Or you with the Nicaro, you can call them, but there is a Nicaro to let them go. And I experienced something similar like this, And well, these are many of them. I will not get into details. The great three serpents, the Sachamama, Yakumama, and Wairamama, and notice the flying saucers. Something that I realized when I was there is that the the Yakumama, they believe in Iquitos, Pucallpa, and all the way to the mouth of the Amazon. They call it the Cobra Grande, which can become a boat. So there is this identification of the serpent, canoe among some indigenous tribes, and the boat, even submarine and so on. But what I never realized was that also there was an identification between the Wairamama and some sort of flying saucers. And in fact, I interviewed some people. Well, the story is that, do I have time? That when I was doing the diet with the Shipibo, I took one of these small boats, and I was in the hammock, and then somebody woke me up and said, the captain is calling you. I went out, and there was a big, about half of or 1/3 of the full moon, an object there, just a light, and gradually went up. But the captain was telling me many stories. He said that he has seen many of these. He said that once the whole flying saucer was in front in the river, he had to stop the boat, and many stories. So I didn't have my video camera with me. And I said, I wrote here the name of the boat, and I said, I have to go back again. And I did. Next year, I went with the camera. I found the boat, but he was working in another boat. But there were people cleaning the engine, and before leaving, I thought, okay, have you, any of you, I was doing a camera, any of you seen the flying saucer? All of them. A big story, so I have a very nice footage of that thing, Anyway, so in 1991, this book was published. And Dennis and other people are saying that this is perhaps, one of the elements that launched the globalization of ayahuasca, because this book, was a coffee table book. You went to many places, and I think that not only because of Pablo's extraordinary paintings, but I think that also I presented a very careful description of what is needed. I mean, the story of the vegetalistas, the importance of the plant teachers, the Icaros, the diet, and all that. And I think that this was presented as a package somehow. So that it was not only ayahuasca, and you take ayahuasca and you see all these things, but you see ayahuasca is a plant teacher. In order to learn from it, you have to keep a diet, you learn songs and all that. So somehow it was like a sort of package that, and then a lot of people went to Peru and so on, and I have not been since then, and I'm almost afraid to go. But Eugenia is going to talk also. I'm very curious about the phenomenon, what happened after I left in the 80s, Yeah. Okay, so I did also some work in Brazil, and this is the other part, the other very important focus of expansion of ayahuasca, is Rio Branco, Porto Velho, where the churches were created. And this was after Brazil took part of in the Second World War on the side of the Allies, and sent some troops to Mussolini to fight Mussolini, and then he sent the so-called soldados da borracha, which means the rubber soldiers. The Japanese have taken Southeast Asia. So Schultes was sent to Colombia to find rubber, to catalog, and then these people were there. Many of the Brazilian Northeast, who are African, Afro-Brazilian, were sent to work as in the borracha. And all the three great founders of the Brazilian phenomenon, they come from the Northeast. blacks. Raimundo Irineo in the 30s created his church in the 30s. Daniel Pereira de Matos, Barquinha in the 40s, and then José Gabriel de Acosta created the UDV in the 60s. I did myself, you know, the Santo Daime, the first line of Raimundo Irineo Serra had been studied. There were several master theses, but nothing was known about Barquinha. So I did several periods of field work here in Barquinha. And this is José Gabriel de Costa, an early photo of him with the first communities. But anyway, so I did work with the Barquinha, and what fascinated me was the integration of the syncretism of elements from not only Amazonian, not so much Amazonia, but a lot of popular Catholicism, Umbanda, Candomblé, Cardecism, you know, from the French doctor who wrote the Book of Spirits. So a Portuguese took this book to Brazil, and nowadays we have something like 6 million Cardecists in Brazil. The use of this white, they introduce it. And then, of course, esoteric ideas, including some Oriental ideas like karma, reincarnation, and so on. It is also found there. I was fascinated because I was able to document this incorporation of spirits, of the 4 kinds of spirits, and you see the syncretism. You have Catholic iconography, you have black slaves, you have mermaids, all of these in the services in the church, in which they sing songs and meditate. But then, after midnight, they go out to the terrero, and that is like completely different. They take ayahuasca again, and then there is the spirits are taking over. They have different songs and rhythm which are invoke particular spirits, and that is the time for that, you know. So completely, and this is the iconography, and very, very interesting. For instance, they have mediums. They take ayahuasca, incorporate these spirits, and then it is open every Wednesday, I think. The church was open for people to go to ask for advice, simply. Advice from the pretos vellos, the old black slaves. And even I found a case in which one preto vello, one woman went to see a preto vello who was his husband, her husband. But, you know, being a preto vello at that time, you know, he was not her husband. He was this other spirit, you know. So anyway. I have fantastic footage of all these, and this is the typical gestures that they do when they are on the incorporated black spirit. And in other cases, other spirits, they call it encantados. Many of these ideas, they came from the Northeast. You know, in 1992, there was this conference, which I think that it was also very important for the globalization of ayahuasca and the interest in plants in general. Not everybody is here, but you had Manolo and Donna, and then I think Jace Callaway is there. Yes, Jace Callaway, who did a study on the ayahuasca alkaloids, and Jose Feriglia, who then introduced into Spain, and it was and so on. So this conference was very important because Jonathan Ott was there, and out of this conference, many other conferences came after. So we have this. Then we had one in Lérida, 2 years later in Spain. Then he went to San Francisco. Then he went to Amsterdam, I think. Then went to Canada, and that was the end of it. You know, but out of this came also the Terence and Rob Montgomery's the Palenque, the series of Palenque. You know, I think that it was Manolo who told me this. This is true. That the idea of the Palenque thing came out of this meeting as well. So, and Jonathan Ott especially, absolutely very important. He published these ayahuasca analogs, and so we have ayahuasca as a print, footprint for many other possibilities. Dennis did the study on the beta-carbolines and DMT. Jonathan published the other possibilities of creating something similar. And nowadays we have huge experimentation around the world with all sorts of ayahuasca australis, with mimosa, with Syrian rue, and so on. And one of the things that happens with ayahuasca is just like, it's impossible to keep up anymore, because these are only a little part of it. The number of books, people take ayahuasca and, they have to, make sense of this, and they write the story. Of course, this is one of the things that happens. It's like a tremendous influx of creativity. I've taken ayahuasca now over 1,000 times, so trying to see it as much as possible objectively. And there are moments in which it's like your imagination, it's just flowing freely in front of you. You have not make any efforts. It's just in front of you. And I sometimes do experiments, like, for instance, think of a concept, flower, and then flowers come out, all sorts of flowers that I have not think of, or water, or lakes, or birds, or even the other day I think telephone, and all these telephones, from all, and then bicycle, all these, just like huge database that we have, and produce instantaneously, And I've been thinking, what a tool we have here, Of course, when people take ayahuasca, they have to go through their personal thing first, relationships and their own traumas, whatever, But gradually, and sometimes the problem is that your worldview seriously is challenged, because you start to think about, the nature of reality, what is this, is true or not, and so on. But it's just fantastic how suddenly you have in front of you this possibility of, once you go through all that, do it as an experiment, experientially, as an experiment. And I know that so many people take ayahuasca. Healing is very important. And Ralph Messer was talking in a previous conference that this has to be the most important ayahuasca, because it's healing to all levels, personal healing and healing of society and healing of the planet, and all this, But I think that it is also possible that we can use it also as a tool of investigation, a research tool, which once you more or less are able to handle all these situations, let's work on something, a group of people work on something, and it is my dream to be able to do that, to have small groups with a particular problem, and let's work on this, Well, so many artists inspired by ayahuasca not only artists, it's filmmakers, it is musicians, it is opera. I recall a composer who made an opera. This is, it's just like an explosion of creativity that is coming out of this, and that is. Of course, very positive, but also a little bit worrisome is what will happen with ayahuasca, because now is so many in the media. I'm afraid that the two great institutions are trying to get hold of it. The religious institutions that very often, fortunately, can be quite dogmatic and say, no, this is the way. This is. Then we have the medical institutions. They say, okay, this is our domain because it's healing and all this. This is ours, Of course, then you have the indigenous people. This is our tradition. What is this? Why you are taking this from us? That you take it out of context. You don't understand really, And then we have people like, well, this is my position. I just want to know. I just want to know without taking this or that, just I want to know. I want to see what happens. I know I want to use it to understand my own mind, and trying to get in touch with all these scientists that see it from different perspective. And very interesting that all the scientists I know that are working with ayahuasca or the substances, they have personal experience. And in fact, if you begin to search why you started to study alkaloid, oh, I have this ayahuasca experience, oh, this experience, I want to know what is behind, you know. So we have all this extraordinary movement of research. So I think that show you some slides. Part of the work I do is organizing visionary art exhibitions, and this is, for instance, a work by Rick Harlow from Boston. You see, I don't know, it's too light here. You see the maloca, you know, he's inside a maloca. He was, and then you see the visions superimposed to the maloca. Okay. And here just end up with this. This is the new edition of Ayahuasca Reader. Many of the texts that I refer to are there, including the very first one, a reference to ayahuasca. I think that Manolo is going to talk about that, and many other texts by ethnographers, botanists, and some hymns from the churches and so on. Okay, so I think that this is it. I don't know how much time I have. Okay?